Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at AAA characteristics. We'll be discussing authentication without AAA, AAA components, authentication modes, authorization, and accounting. This episode is part of my series on network security. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. The simplest method of remote access authentication is to configure a login and password combination on the console, VTY lines, or the AUX ports. That's what we have right here. Is going across the internet, we have configured our VTY password to get into that device. And so we have that user authentication. We just don't know the password to get into it. Now, this method provides no accountability. Anyone with the password can gain entrance to your devices. And then with access, then they can come in and configure and make changes, maybe disrupt your network. SSH is a more secure form of remote access. It requires both a username and a password, both of which are encrypted during transmission. Now, the local database method has some limitations. The user accounts must be configured on the local device. So each user you want to connect in there, you have to go to that local device, configure that user on that device. Network and administrative AAA security in the Cisco environment has three functional components: authentication, authorization, and accounting and auditing. Now, what we have here is authentication. Users and administrators must prove their identity before accessing the network and network resources. Authentication can be established using a username and password combinations, challenge and response questions, token cards, or several other methods. For example, here it's I am a user, and that's your username, and then I know the password to prove it. And so that's what you're doing. You have the username and password combination. Then we have authorization. After the user is authenticated, so we did authentication first, now we're on authorization. After that user is authenticated, authorization services determines which resources, which things can that user access, and which operations that user is allowed to perform. An example here is the user of student can access host server XYZ only using SSH. That would be an example of authorization. And then we have accounting and auditing. Accounting records what the user does, including what is accessed, the amount of time the resource is accessed, and any changes that were made. Accounting keeps track of how the network resources are used. An example here is the user that we're going to call student again, access host server XYZ using SSH for 15 minutes. That would be an example of what the accounting function does. If you like this episode on AAA characteristics and you get value out of it, and depending upon the platform you're using, please click the like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. Doing this supports the channel, which in turn helps me bring you more great content. Click that notification bell to turn on notifications to be alerted every time I release a new episode, and there are a bunch of new episodes headed your way. You can also visit my website at KevTechify.com for all my details and how to get these episodes in video and podcast form. Cisco provides two common methods for implementing AAA services. One is local AAA authentication, and the other is server-based AAA authentication. Here we have local AAA authentication. What happens here is the client establishes a connection to our AAA device, typically probably something like SSH. Now, our AAA device, our AAA router here, is going to ask the user here for our username and then the password. Once the user sends the username and password, it will then authenticate that user for the different resources on the network. Local AAA uses a local database for authentication. Now, this method is sometimes also known as a self-contained authentication. All of the authentication is stored on this server. Typically what we do is create a username or a user here. Set the username and password on that device. Here we have server-based AAA authentication. Now with server-based method, the router accesses a central server, such as a Cisco Secure Access Control System for Windows, which is right here. So this is that ACS server. Now, the central AAA server contains the username and passwords for all the users. The router either uses a Radius remote access dial-in user service or a TACACS terminal access control system, and it uses those protocols to communicate with the AAA server. So it either uses, once again, was Radius. How this works here is the client establishes a connection with the router. Then the AAA router here prompts the username or prompts the user for a username and password. Now the router then authenticates this. So now the router got that username and password back. It communicates with the AAA server, either using Radius or TACACS. It authenticates the username and passwords with that AAA server. And then the user is provided with access to the network based on the information in that remote AAA server. For authorization, after the users are successfully authenticated against the selected AAA data source, either local or server-based. So either, once again, local is the accounts are on the server. This would be for local. And then server-based, you have this AAA server set up here. So either method, so after they've been authenticated, then they're authorized for specific resources. Based upon their login, they're giving certain access to certain resources according to what you, the administrator, have set up. Accounting is implemented using a AAA server. Now, this service reports usage statistics back to the ACS server. These statistics can be extracted to create detailed reports about the configuration of the network. Now, some of the types of accounting information that can be collected is network accounting, connection accounting, exec accounting, system accounting, and then also the command accounting. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on AAA characteristics. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and depending upon the platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell. All my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com. You can get all of these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on network security. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode on my series on network security. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.